For centuries, family farmers have stewarded the countryside. The rolling hills and fields that we think of when we think of this country, they're not natural. They were built, they were maintained, they were created by the farming community, specifically by family farmers. My name's Tom Harwood and this is GBN Originals. Now, family farmers have had a tough time of it recently. Of course, the costs of farming have risen with the costs of importing grain, the costs of getting that fuel for all sorts of farming machinery, and of course, new impositions for climate measures too. 10% of farms in this country may well be put towards net zero measures. Many farmers moving away from producing food, diversifying, as it's known in the business, so that they can create more money with campsites or other sorts of income generating streams. It's a concerning time for the family farming businesses. It's a concerning time for those generations of farmers who, for generation after generation after generation, have not just produced food for this country, but also looked after the land that they farm. They know that if they sold off their land, they could probably cash in, make a lot more money. They know that they could sell up and move on and perhaps have a more lucrative life. But they farm because farming means more than money. It's about culture, it's about history, and it's about food security. Now, ever since the new Labour government got elected back in June, there have been concerns that farmers, far from being at the forefront of their thoughts, have been lower than low, down the bottom of the list. The new farming minister doesn't represent a rural seat, he represents a city. The agricultural secretary represents Croydon in London, not a farm in sight. Clearly this government has not put the rural community at the top of their political decision making. And perhaps that's why the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, in her budget, decided that for the first time, family farms should be subjected to pernicious levels of inheritance tax. Inheritance tax that might be survivable for other sorts of business that have liquid assets, but for businesses like farms that have material assets that are perhaps asset rich but cash poor, well, that sort of inheritance tax levy placed on these farms could be devastating. It could mean that these farmers have to sell up their farms or sell a huge proportion of their farms to the point that those farms become economically unviable.
Us blokes hate talking about a little thinning up top, and many of us settle with that balding look, but that wasn't for me, and that's why I went to Elite Hair, the world's leading hair loss clinic, and now I've had over 4,000 new hairs added to this barnet, and very soon I'm going to be rocking some brand new flowing locks. And you can too! So how does it work? Step 1, I sent the team a set of photos of my head. Step 2, I then spoke to one of the Elite Hair staff who looked through my photo submissions and worked out a treatment plan for me. Step 3, Elite Hair then organised accommodation and the treatment. I was at their state-of-the-art treatment centre in Istanbul, and their incredibly kind staff took me through the process, and before I knew it, I was in surgery. Elite Hair and their leading medical experts have specialised in pain-free treatments using the Sleep Deep method, and they really mean that. I felt incredibly relaxed the whole time, and I haven't felt any pain since. Check out Elite Hair using the link in the description. When you do, Elite Hair will provide you with a free personalised hair analysis. Then you'll join over 100,000 happy patients. Hit that link and start your hair growth journey like I did today!
Well, farmers have launched a tenacious campaign now for the last 6 months, which has been talking about the importance of farms to the United Kingdom, the importance of food security, and just how damaging the imposition of inheritance tax could be on all of these farms. Over the course of the last few decades, we've seen land values rise and rise. These farmers didn't buy this land with a huge amount of money. It's almost incidental that the land they happen to farm is now worth more than it once was. But why then should the Treasury be coming in and trying to grab it? Why then should there be this change to how this land has been managed? And could this be a bit of subterfuge? Could this simply be the fact that the government doesn't view our farms as efficient enough? The model of small family farms in the United Kingdom is becoming more and more unique around the world. You look at the large industrial farms in places like the United States or Australia. Yes, they produce food in a more mass-produced way, in a cheaper way, but also they're run by massive companies. They're not run by the traditional family farms that we see in the UK, and to some extent, they care less for the natural environment that goes along with that farming. British farming is almost unique in that way. It's not just about producing the most food for the cheapest price. It's also about taking care of the land. And is that something that the Treasury, that the Environment and Food and Rural Affairs Department, is that something that the politicians have forgotten in their rush to try and impose yet more tax on our farmers? Well, a petition was launched at the official parliamentary petition website. Of course, if a petition reaches more than 100,000 signatures, it's debated in Parliament. And that brings us to the Farmers' March on Parliament this week. Yes, hundreds of farmers with perhaps the largest flotilla of tractors to ever descend upon Westminster. They're coming to Parliament to hear this debate. 150,000 people signed a petition, and now the politicians are forced to hear these arguments in favour of keeping the family farm tax regime as it is, in avoiding that new imposition of inheritance tax. Well, we've been with those farmers as they've travelled from Slough into central London. We've been there in Westminster today, talking to those farmers about just how damaging this new tax could be if it goes ahead as planned, and really how much farming matters to this country. Let's listen in.
I'm Emily Carver and I'm here in Whitehall in the heart of Westminster as hundreds, if not thousands of tractors descend on the capital to make their voices heard. You can see behind me, we can't afford to feed you anymore on current farm gate prices. Urgent message from farmers right at the front of the protest on Whitehall, and I'm delighted to be joined by the Shadow Environment Secretary, Victoria Atkins, who's here to support farmers. Victoria, tell me a little bit more about why you've chosen to be here.
Well, look, today Whitehall is filled to the rim with tractors, but also importantly with farming people. And this is just the next stage in our campaign across rural communities to try to get this Labour government to axe the family farm tax. I've represented a very rural agricultural seat in Lincolnshire for a decade now, and I can understand only too well the terrible choice that Labour has made. And this is a choice. They have decided to do this, but also the impact it is already having on farming. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was at the LAMA conference, which is the largest conference of agricultural machinery in the country, and people were saying that they weren't investing in the future because they were so worried about the impact that this tax would have on their farms in the coming years. So this is having an impact today, and this is why people have travelled from all over the country to try to ensure that this message gets through to the Labour government that this tax is wrong, they should axe it, and if they won't do it, we as a Conservative government will reverse the family farm tax if and when we're in government.
I do have a guest. He's a dairy farmer from Yorkshire, is that right?
Pickering, yes.
Pickering. So, Charles Scully, thank you for joining us on GB News. Why are you here today?
Well, the government's changes that they've made with the budget are very far-reaching, and there's a lot of things which aren't particularly being talked about as much. So there's things such as they're imposing a £50 a tonne of carbon tax on imported fertiliser, which is going to really increase the cost of production for us, and it's going to make us less viable to compete with foreign imports, because those foreign imports don't have that tax. And like I say, it's a £50 per tonne of carbon. Fertiliser is quite carbon intensive to produce, so it could potentially be £150 per tonne of actual fertiliser, which is a massive price hike when margins are already so thin.
So this is, it's not just a question of inheritance tax. You're saying there's actually another dimension to this that we're not talking about enough. I do want to ask more broadly, though, about the government's response. They say they're steadfast in supporting farmers. They provided £5 billion in the budget. That's what they said today in the Downing Street lobby briefing. You seem unconvinced.
Well, the £5 billion is a bit misleading because it's a £5 billion over 2 years, so it's actually only £2.5 billion, which is not a rise, and this budget hasn't risen in many years. So in real terms, we're actually getting far less because of large inflation of everything, of steel, of machinery, of fertiliser, all these sorts of things. So in reality, although they've kept that budget the same, it's in real terms it's a reduction, and also they've cut the grants that are available for doing environmental work. There's lots of grants available to encourage farmers to do environmental work on their farms, and DEFRA have cut those grants. So although the budget is there, in theory, how are they going to get it to us? Because they've cut one of the ways that they're paying us to do environmental work.
Charles, finally, I just want to ask, what is your message directly to the government? If Keir Starmer was standing right here in front of us, what would you say to him?
Just speak to us, speak to any of these farmers and get the real story.
Well, these farmers certainly are not giving up the fight. Clearly, this means so much, not just to the farmers who currently farm the green fields of this country, but also to their children. Because this is ultimately about making farming sustainable, about being able to pass one farm from one generation to the next. Is there anything more human than that? Well, it seems that the bean counters in the Treasury might need to think about these family farms, these generations of farmers, a little bit harder, and perhaps the tractor's descent on Westminster might have brought that thought a little closer to the politicians' minds. Well, I've been Tom Harwood for GBN Originals, and do remember to subscribe to the GBN YouTube channel for more original content like this.